For a number of footballers, the 2022 World Cup will live long in the memory. Gonçalo Ramos scored a hat-trick on his World Cup debut for Portugal, which was the only hat-trick at the tournament until Kylian Mbappe scored one in the final. Olivier Giroud became France's all-time leading goal scorer through his winning goal against England in the quarter-final, overtaking none other than Thierry Henry, and the entire Morocco team could hold their heads high, having become the best African national team in the history of the FIFA World Cup. Oh, and I suppose it went alright for Messi and Argentina as well. For others, the 2022 World Cup might be slightly less memorable. Wayne Hennessy, for instance, picked up the first red card of the tournament in Wales' second group game against Iran in the 86th minute, with the score still tied at 0-0, helping Iran to go on and win that game 2-0 and effectively knocking Wales out of the World Cup. Fellow goalkeepers Saad Al-Sheeb and Marshal Barsham, both of Al Sadd and Qatar, had the ignominy of being the only two players at the tournament who looked as though they had never played football before, contributing to Qatar becoming the worst host nation in the history of the World Cup. Meanwhile, Belgium's centre-backs Jan Vertonghen and Toby Alderweireld looked to be a shadow of their formidable former selves, creaking around the pitch like a couple of cast-iron pianos with a wheel removed. In today's video, it is those players who would really rather forget about the 2022 World Cup that we are going to focus on, following the success of a very similar video 4.5 years ago, and then at the end I will take a look at the 7 players that I picked out as having had a World Cup to forget in Russia, whether they bounced back, and how it affected their careers. I know, it all sounds brilliant. Right, let's get straight into it then. Here are 7 players who had a 2022 World Cup to forget. 7th, Niklas Zula. I like Niklas Zula a lot, and I have said as much several times before on this channel, and I actually felt from a little at this World Cup. Started at right back in Germany's opening game against Japan, a position which he has only played in 18 times during his entire career, out of more than 300 appearances, even if some of those appearances have come quite recently at Borussia Dortmund. Zula was pulled apart by a fast and energetic Japanese team, and particularly by his opposite number, Takefusa Kubo. In truth, I don't think that Zula has ever got back to his pre-2019 ACL injury best, and never the most agile or alert, playing him out of position at fullback absolutely destroyed him. Similarly, he never recovered from that scarring game against the Japanese at this World Cup. Moved to centre-back against Spain and Costa Rica, but struggling to get to grips with his defensive duties in both matches. In Zula's defence, no German defenders covered themselves in glory at the World Cup, as the 4-time world champion suffered a second successive group stage exit, but Zula was still the worst of the lot. And as such, he has come in for the heaviest criticism. Now he returns to a Dortmund team that is struggling somewhat in the Bundesliga, currently sat outside of the Champions League and even the Europa League places, though scoring goals has been just as much of a problem as letting too many in for Dortmund manager Edin Terzic's men so far this season. 6th, Darwin Nunez. It was a World Cup to forget in general for Uruguay, who went out in the group stage behind South Korea, and several of their players were very underwhelming. Ultimately, though, none fell as far short of the expectations that most people have of them, and most likely that they have of themselves, than Liverpool's Darwin Nunez. One of the most unusual footballers that I've seen in recent years, everything about Nunez seems to be just a little unorthodox. And going into this World Cup, I remember remarking to a friend that he could either win the Golden Boot or get sent off for a headbutt in Uruguay's opener, and that we wouldn't see him again. In the end, we got neither from Nunez, who just sort of, didn't really do anything. At least headbutting someone would have been quite dramatic. He played on the left of a 3 against South Korea, which didn't seem to suit him at all, but even in his preferred role, playing through the middle in a 2 against both Portugal and Ghana, he did absolutely nothing to impact either game. During the Portugal game in particular, Nunez was the most ineffective player on the pitch, ultimately getting hauled off after just 72 minutes, along with his strike partner Edinson Cavani, who, it should be said, also had a really poor tournament, and he was replaced by Maxi Gomez, who plays in the Turkish Super League for Trabzonspor, where he has scored 1 goal in 8 games so far this season. That, perhaps, speaks volumes in of itself. I'm not quite sure how much we can extrapolate from Nunez's poor World Cup form. He is the type of player, given his movement and how many chances Liverpool create, who could easily go on to score an absolute hatful of goals during the second half of the season. And we ought not forget that he is still only 23 years old. But nonetheless, at this World Cup, few players put in 3 successive performances poorer than him, and it is a tournament that he won't want to dwell on for long. 5th, Almoez Ali. I have seen a fair amount of revisionism already about Qatar at this World Cup, where they were undoubtedly the worst team. Whilst it is true that Qatar is a tiny country and that this was their World Cup debut, they have also spent an absolute fortune over the last 20 years attempting to build a competitive national team, and it appeared as though they had done just that in 2019 when they won the Asian Cup. Whilst fellow AFC nations like Japan, South Korea, and Australia all made it through to the knockout stage though, and even Saudi Arabia beat Argentina, Qatar lost all 3 games, barely laying a glove on any of their opponents. Akram Afif and Almoez Ali were billed as Qatar's star men heading into the tournament, and for good reason. Afif is a gifted wide man, really good on the ball, who began his professional career playing in Europe. Meanwhile, Ali, a native of Sudan who also started his career in Europe, is already Qatar's joint record all-time leading goalscorer with 42 goals from 88 caps at the age of only 26. Ali missed a sitter at the end of the first half against Ecuador in Qatar's opening game, if I remember correctly, before picking up a yellow card and getting axed in the 72nd minute. It was a reflection of his dreadful performance. But hey, it was only 1 game. Surely Ali would bounce back against Senegal and the Netherlands. In reality, things would only get worse for him from that point on. In fact, Ali didn't record a single shot on goal despite playing a full 90 minutes against either Senegal or the Netherlands. And whilst the service to him was almost non-existent, whenever he did get on the ball or was presented with a chance, he looked absolutely hapless. You can't judge a player on 3 games, and Ali was outstanding at the Asian Cup. But on the biggest stage of all, he couldn't really have performed much worse. 4th, Danny Ward. I said over the summer that I didn't think Kasper Schmeichel would be any great loss to Leicester City on the pitch this season, since whilst they would undoubtedly miss his leadership and experience qualities, I think that his performances regressed a little over the last 18 months, and in Danny Ward and Daniel Iverson, they have 2 very good goalkeepers. It was Ward who stepped in to replace Schmeichel as Leicester's number 1, and at the start of the season, he seemingly did his absolute best to make me look like the stupidest person on a platform, which I literally share with Rory Jennings. Every shot on Leicester's goal in their opening 6 or 7 games of the Premier League season seemed to find the back of the net, and I was a little surprised actually that Brendan Rodgers kept faith in him, given how well Daniel Iverson played on loan at Preston last season. That faith was beginning to be repaid when the World Cup break arrived, with Ward actually having kept 4 clean sheets in his last 5 games, the sole exception coming against Manchester City, in which he still conceded just 1 goal. And he made some really impressive saves during that time, starting to spare my blushes. At the World Cup, he was Wales's number 2 behind Wayne Hennessy, as had been expected, but after Hennessy was sent off after 86 minutes, in Wales's second group game against Iran, Ward got his introduction. In the 98th minute, he was beaten by a good but nonetheless savable effort from range, and a couple of minutes later, he was beaten once again after going to ground far too early in a one-on-one situation. That gave Wales an almost impossible task against England, but yet again, it would be a match to forget for Ward. He did well to deny Marcus Rashford in the first half, but in the second half, he was beaten twice by Rashford, far too easily, once from a free kick, and then from a shot that he let through his legs. In about 110 minutes of football at the World Cup, Ward conceded 5 goals, at least 2 of them, which he probably ought to have saved. Hopefully, it won't have knocked his confidence too much, and he is able to pick up where he left off with the Foxes, not least because he is still in my FPL team. Third, Eden Hazard. What a difference 4 years makes. At the 2018 World Cup in Russia, Eden Hazard captained Belgium to 3rd place, their best ever finish at a World Cup, winning the silver ball as the 2nd best player at the tournament, trailing only Luka Modric. At the time, aged 27, Hazard was Chelsea's star man, one of the best footballers on the planet, and many people considered him to be the best player in the Belgium team, ahead of Kevin De Bruyne. 4.5 years on, Hazard has scored just 7 goals and made only 11 assists from 72 appearances in the last 3.5 years since signing for Real Madrid. So, perhaps we shouldn't have expected an enormous amount from him at this World Cup. In all honesty, and just speaking personally, I didn't expect much from Hazard in Qatar, though I perhaps did expect a little bit more than what we actually got. He was fairly anonymous, as was the entire Belgium team in fairness, in their fortunate 1-0 win against Canada, in which he was replaced after 62 minutes. He was totally anonymous as Belgium lost 2-0 to Morocco, substituted after 60 minutes that time around, and he was dropped entirely for Belgium's decisive group stage finale against Croatia, introduced off the bench in the 87th minute. In fairness, they weren't all that much better without him, drawing 0-0 and still bowing out in the group stage, but it was a sad tournament overall for Hazard, reflecting just how far he has fallen in quite a short period of time, and at the end of it he announced his retirement from international football following 126 caps at the age of only 31. Second, Cristiano Ronaldo. It is hard to imagine how this World Cup could have gone any worse for Cristiano Ronaldo, other than if it had been announced as Lionel Messi lifted the World Cup trophy that law enforcement in Las Vegas had reopened their case against him. Ronaldo came into this tournament at an all-time low, at least from a career perspective, having barely featured at Manchester United this season and drawing criticism for reportedly refusing to come on in a game and leaving the stadium before a match had even finished. Just before the World Cup began, Ronaldo gave an exclusive interview to his biggest cheerleader in the media, Piers Morgan, in which he said that he didn't respect Erik ten Hag and he was highly critical of Manchester United. The day before Portugal's opening game against Ghana, Manchester United confirmed that Ronaldo's contract had been terminated by mutual consent, making him one of only a handful of free agents at the World Cup. In Portugal's opening game, Ronaldo didn't play particularly well, but he did still find the back of the net from the penalty spot to become the first player to score at 5 FIFA World Cups. He then seemingly claimed to have scored in Portugal's next game against Uruguay, only for it to be revealed that he hadn't actually touched the ball, and the goal was awarded to Bruno Fernandes instead. Ronaldo's performance against South Korea in Portugal's last group game was his worst of the tournament, and possibly the worst of his career, or at least the worst that I've witnessed, resulting in him being withdrawn after 65 minutes, not looking best pleased about it, and then him getting dropped as Portugal faced Switzerland in the round of 16. Without him, Portugal looked much more convincing, beating Switzerland 6-1, meaning that he remained on the bench in the quarter-finals against Morocco. With things not working out, Ronaldo was introduced at the beginning of the second half, but he barely got a kick as Portugal were knocked out by the North Africans. Of course, this all comes in the context of Ronaldo's last World Cup, his one last shot at the biggest trophy of them all, having won so many others but not this one, and not only didn't he win it, and not only was he sacked, dropped and mocked all at the same tournament, Lionel Messi, a man Ronaldo has so long viewed as his rival as the best player on the planet, a rivalry we know he has always been so invested in, did get his hands on a first World Cup, at what is almost certain to have been his last World Cup as well. First, Romelu Lukaku. Oh, Romelu. I feel bad for Romelu Lukaku, who is very simply one of the greatest goal scorers of his generation, but I fear that he won't be remembered as such, or as fondly, at least outside of a handful of his former clubs, as he really should. Not only is Lukaku Belgium's all-time leading goal scorer, he became their all-time top scorer at the age of only 24. And 68 goals from only 104 caps to date gives him a better international goals per game record than Cristiano Ronaldo, Lionel Messi, and Robert Lewandowski. Those who seek to dismiss Lukaku's talents then do him an enormous disservice. But at the 2022 World Cup, you wouldn't have known that Lukaku was one of the most prolific international goal scorers ever to have played the game. Having only played 4 games for Inter Milan so far this season, and less than 30 minutes of football in the last 3 months before this tournament, there were doubts pre-World Cup around whether Lukaku would even make Roberto Martinez's squad. He did, but Martinez made it clear in a press conference that he wouldn't play Lukaku unless he was fit. And Michy Batshuayi, who has been in great form for Fenerbahce this season, started ahead of him against Canada and Morocco, before Martinez opted to go strikerless in Belgium's crucial final group game against Croatia. Lukaku made a 9-minute cameo appearance off the bench against Morocco, but desperate times call for desperate measures, so with Belgium set to exit the World Cup at the group stage, he was brought on at halftime against Croatia. Croatia went on to finish third at the 2022 World Cup, another heroic achievement for the tiny Balkan nation, but in truth, Belgium ought to have dumped them out in the group stage. In the last half an hour alone, Lukaku had 4 glaring opportunities which, if remotely sharp, you would expect him and just about any centre-forward worth their salt to bury in their sleep. If you wanted to be charitable towards Lukaku, and quite frankly why wouldn't you, it was his movement and striking instincts, which few players in the game can rival, which got him in the right place at the right time and time again. If you wanted to be a little bit less charitable, and I really don't see why you would say that Lukaku probably made 4 of the worst misses he has ever made in the same game, off the bench, in one of the biggest games of his career, and that Stevie Wonder would probably have done better with at least 2 of them. To make matters worse for Lukaku, at the end of that game, he punched his hand straight through one of the dugouts, which my girlfriend branded as awful at the time, stating, "I know that he's frustrated, but I just don't think that he should ever be allowed to play football after that." She takes a pretty hard line on any kind of dissent. Lukaku didn't play again at the World Cup, and nor did Belgium, and this is a World Cup that he will be very keen to banish to the memory books as quickly as possible. Right, those are my 7 for 2022, but very briefly, the 7 players who I picked out as having had a 2018 World Cup to forget were Timo Werner, Robert Lewandowski, Javier Mascherano, Willy Caballero, Manuel Neuer, David De Gea, and Jerome Boateng. Werner bounced back relatively well and was sorely missed by Germany at this World Cup, which he missed through injury. Lewandowski, it would be fair to say, bounced back pretty immediately, scoring 40 goals the following season, and he has actually played the best football of his career since the last World Cup. Javier Mascherano left Barcelona in a move to China in 2018 and retired in 2020. Fellow Argentine Willy Caballero, despite being 3 years Mascherano's senior, is still going strong as a backup at Southampton at the age of 41, though, unsurprisingly, he didn't make Argentina's World Cup squad this time around. Fellow goalkeeper Manuel Neuer was back at his best before too long, but having been the best keeper at the 2014 World Cup, he has now had successive disappointing World Cups with Germany. David De Gea's disastrous 2018 World Cup really seemed to knock him for 6 for the next couple of seasons, badly impacting his club form at Manchester United though. He has been much improved more recently, and Jerome Boateng hasn't played for Germany since getting sent off at the 2018 World Cup, and now plays his club football in France for Lyon. Make of that what you will, in terms of what it might mean for 2022's intake of players who had World Cups to forget. Probably nothing, if we're being honest, but I found it interesting nonetheless. Anyway, That is it for today's video. Hit the like button if you enjoyed it. I sincerely hope that was the case. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and make sure that you are subscribed and have notifications turned on for HITC Sevens. You can also find me on either Twitter or on Instagram via the username @HITC Sevens on both, should you wish to do so.